Alright, so the next thing we'll do is look at how we can get the character walking along a predefined path. So he can walk around corners, and we'll even make him do a loop-the-loop. And that will also give us the opportunity to look at some of the additional options we've got over here in this strip panel. Alright, so we'll start off by creating a curve then. So full screen, Shift-A, and we'll choose a Bezier curve. Now in order for this to work, we need to make sure that the origin of the 3D curve matches up with the origin of the armature on frame 1. So shift left arrow to go back to frame 1. We can see the origin, this little yellow dot, is at world 0. So we'll choose the curve and press Alt G, and that will put the curve to world 0 as well. Now both of the origins will match up. If your robot wasn't at world 0, you can either put it back to world 0, or you can move the 3D cursor to the robot's origin with Shift S, and then you can move the curve to the 3D cursor with Shift S, move to cursor. With that done, we're going to top view. Make sure you're in orthographic, and you can tell because this little icon doesn't have any perspective when it's in orthographic, like it does there. So if it does, just press number 5 and that'll go orthographic. Right. So into edit mode, and we can start moving the control points around and rotating the handles. And control right click, you can add new handles. And then we'll select all of the handles, right click, and we'll choose set handle type to automatic. And that will recalculate the handles to give us the smoothest possible result. Back into object mode. Now there's two ways we can approach this. There's an easy way or a fast way, they're both easy. But the fast way, it does have limitations. We're not able to modify the shape of the path once we've animated the character along it without the character's feet starting to slip. But if you know you're not intending to change the shape of the path, then that's fine. So both ways are useful. Well, the bit longer to set up way, but still easy, allows us to then modify the curve after we've made the character walk along it. And that will just give you a bit more flexibility if you want to then change things without having to mess about getting the feet to move at the right speed again. But I'll show you both ways. We'll start with the fast way. So with the character selected, we'll go into the constraints, the object constraints, not the bone constraints, and we'll choose to add a follow path. Choose the path in the target, and we'll choose Bezier curve, only one in the scene. And if we press play, at the moment it's still going to be using the existing NLA tracks down here. Now we don't want to be modifying the speed with this that we used last time, so I'm just going to push that down. So walk speed, I've pushed it down into its own track, and then I can turn that off. And we're not going to be using the character move either, so I'll turn that off. We've still got them for later if we want them. We are going to be using the walk cycle, obviously. Alright, so we've got the character with the constraint. If we press play, now the character is just going to walk in place. So to get him to follow this path, what we actually need to do is, well, there's two ways we can do it. We can click on animate path, and now press play. It will follow the path automatically. And what that's done is if we go onto the curve and then into the curve properties, under path animation, it's just set a keyframe up for us for the evaluation time. So basically on the first frame, it's going to show 0. And then as we go along to whatever's set in the top here in frames, it will get to 100% evaluation time. And then it's just going to keep going. So what we need to do is specify which frame we want it to end at the last point, the 100% along the path. So I'm just going to change this to 200. And now the complete frame range will be used to get from one end to the other. Now at the moment, the character's facing the wrong way. So what we need to do to fix that is go back into the constraint and just change the option here to be follow curve. So click on follow curve, and now the character will point along the curve. At the moment, it's doing a bit of a moonwalk, which is not really what I want. So I'm going to change the direction that it's facing by changing the forward axis on the constraint. So at the moment it's facing Y, which is correct, but in the wrong direction. So I'm just going to flip that by using Y minus, and now it'll face in the right way. Now we can see that the feet are actually sliding along. So let's if we look at here. So we need to fix that. Now the easiest way to do it, because we've created in the item properties the walk speed property, we can just modify this by eye until it looks like the feet are not sliding. So at the moment the feet are sliding backwards, which indicates that they're moving too quickly. So basically we just need to slow those down a bit using the walk speed on the right hand side. So let's try increasing the walk speed in order to slow down the feet a little bit. 0.6 I think would be a good value. Press play. And now you can see that's pretty much bang on actually. Maybe very slightly too fast because there's still a little bit of sliding coming backwards. So I'll go with maybe 0.63. This is okay, providing you don't want to then change the curve. Because if I come into here now, and I make this curve a little bit longer, I'll move this along on the y-axis. Now he's got further to walk in those 200 frames because it's still going to go from the first one to the last one in that 200 frames. So the character is going to be walking much faster. But now obviously, if you come out of edit mode, his feet are going to be going too slow. So you can see there, the feet are nowhere near quick enough. Now what I can do is change, again, the speed of the walk, so maybe 0.3. But it becomes a bit tedious after a while if you're going to continue making modifications. Okay, so we'll come out of full screen and we'll have a look at the second method. We can get rid of the follow path, just make sure you're on frame 1. So delete this, character's going to jump back over here. And because the only action we've got on the meta rig now, on the armature, is the walk cycle, that's all that's going to be happening. It's going to be walking in place. And we can change the speed of that, make it a bit slower. We'll change the walk speed to 1. And there we go. Right. What we're going to do instead of using a follow path is basically we're going to take advantage of the action that we created earlier. If you remember, where this ensured, because this and this strip here were both driven by the walk speed on the playback scale, it ensured that whatever we change the walk speed to, the feet would always remain planted, like so. I want to use this existing motion, but somehow transfer it onto the curve without using the constraint that we used before. Now we can't unfortunately do it on an armature because we don't have any modifiers, and that's what we're going to need to use, a modifier. It's the curve modifier in actual fact. So we're going to have to use a piece of geometry instead. So Shift A, we'll add a new object, and we'll add a plane. We need to make sure that its origin matches up with the origin of the curve again. So we'll select this, we'll just press Alt G, put it back to the center. And we'll also make it easier to see that it's going in the right direction. So go into edit mode, go into vertex mode at the top, or number 1 on your keyboard, and choose the 2 front vertices, press M on the keyboard, and then choose to merge at the center. So we've got a triangle now. It's going to be a bit too big, so I'm going to select all of these vertices by pressing A, and then scale in. Now unfortunately, that's not working. I need the triangle to remain around this point of origin. So instead of scaling on the median point or the individual origins, we'll choose the 3D cursor as the origin, and then we need to make sure the 3D cursor is at world 0. So if we press Shift C, that will put the origin, the 3D cursor back to world 0, and now on a scale, you'll see it will always scale towards that origin. And we'll come back out of edit mode into object mode, and with the triangle still selected, we're able now to add modifiers. But first we need to make sure that this moves across at the same speed as the character walking. Now, I'm actually going to turn off the character walk now, so we don't need it to be walking, we don't need this to be moving, the armature. This is going to be controlled by this triangle instead. So let's turn off character move on this object. So it's both in place. And now, thanks to actions, we can actually reuse this character move action on this triangle, and that will make this triangle move along at the correct speed based on whatever we've got set for the walk speed in here. Alright, so make sure you're on here in the NLA editor. We can just turn on this little icon to make sure we're only seeing the things we've got selected in the viewport. So tick that to show just the planes actions. And if you don't see this yellow action in the NLA editor, all it means is you've not yet created a keyframe for the selected object. So you've got 2 options. You can press I to add a keyframe, and now we've got this new action built for us, which we can then change over here. Or alternatively, if we just undo that, we can go to the dope sheet and then into the action editor mode of the dope sheet, and we can choose to assign this a new action, for example the move action. And now we've got this move action applied to this triangle, and then we can play it back and it's going to start moving along based on the speed that we had before. Or if it was already there, then you just click on this one and then you've got the option here to change the action. So let's change the action to the character move. And just to make sure I don't overwrite anything I've got in the existing character move, I'm actually going to click this little icon that says number 2 on it, and this will make it a single user. So it's no longer going to be a duplicate. So click on that and I'll just call this character move for triangle. And we'll push this down into its own strip. And we need to make sure again that we animate the playback scale, or we drive the playback scale based on the walk speed. So click on this, right click, copy as new driver, and then we'll go back onto the little triangle, playback scale, right click, paste driver, and play that back. It's now going to move along at the correct speed for the feet. And we can check that by making sure you've got the triangle selected. Go into edit mode and then select all 3 of the vertices, back into object mode, then we'll select the armature again and then shift click on the triangle, Control P, and we'll say parent to the selected vertices, so the vertex triangle. Now if we play this back, you'll see it's going to walk along, but this time rather than the character being controlled by the action in its own NLA area, it's going to be controlled by the moving triangle that's using that action. So let's make this a little bit longer. So click on the strip and we'll say it's going to end in 200 frames. Or make it a bit further just in case you want to speed up the speed of the walk. The question now is, how do we get this triangle to follow along on this path? We're not going to use we're not going to use a constraint because we'll just have the same problem we had before, where it's not going to match the correct speed based on the feet when we change the length of the curve. What we're going to do instead is use the curve modifier. So with just the plane selected, into the modifiers tab, and we'll choose curve. And we'll set the curve to be the Bezier curve. And we need to just play this back. We need to set the deform axis. So this is going to be Y, I think. That's the wrong direction. So Y negative. Play that back. And the character is now upside down, but to fix this, it's very straightforward. We just need to rotate that plane around on the correct axis by 180 degrees. So let's just turn the curve off, and we'll rotate this round. So R to rotate, Y, and then 180. If we turn this curve back on, it's rotated the character, but if I press play now, it's not moving forward. And that's because creating these keyframes has created keyframes for location and rotation. And that's created a new action, a live action, which is set to replace. So that is basically whatever we've got keyframed in this top new action is overwriting or replacing what's in the action below it. So obviously we need to get rid of the location one. So right click and choose clear keyframes. That will delete all these location keyframes. And now it will work. An alternative method is if we just delete all of these, so clear keyframes for these as well, this is back to 0, we can actually go into the delta transform instead of the plane in the object properties under delta transforms and change this to 180. So delta transforms are extra transformations that take place after the animation system. So this will also work. And we can see the character is now walking along with the feet moving at the correct pace dependent on the speed that the character is moving in the Y direction over here, and then that's been translated onto the curve so that no matter what we do to this curve, it will always be working correctly. So nothing will change. We can make this curve as long as we want, and it will always basically move as far as it can based on the speed that we've got set for the character in the walk speed and the combination of the number of frames we've got in the frame range. So if I set this to, for example, say the walk speed, something really slow, like 2, the character's walking incredibly slowly, so that it means it's going to take a long time to get to the end over there. What I'd need to do, if I want to do that, is change the end speed to something quite high. I don't know, maybe 800. And if we go, let's just select the plane again. We need to make sure that this covers the entire timeline, which it does in this case. If I say change this to 1000 or 1200, you can see the clip no longer extends to the end. So when the character gets to this point, it will just stop, but the walk cycle will continue because that's coming from this action on the meta rig, which goes well beyond the 1200 frames that we've got set. So just select the plane again, and then just to ensure that this clip also goes well beyond the necessary frame range. So we'll increase this to any size surplus to what we're likely to need. And then if we play it back, it will continue walking until the end of the frame range. And again, we can change this speed in real time. Across here, change it to 0.5, you'll get a faster walk. And it will always stay planted perfectly to the ground as it's walking along. So let's make this a lot more interesting by learning how we can use the different options we've got in here to blend multiple actions together to create even more realistic and interesting animations. So I'm going to make a loop the loop on this curve. So we just go into the curve, go into edit mode, go full screen. I'll just quickly add some points. So I'm going to move this one across on the y-axis so it's not quite as long. And we'll subdivide. So I'll set these two end ones, right click, and I'll choose subdivide. And then I'll do Shift R to do that again. So we've got a few more points to play with. And we'll create a loop the loop. So bring this one across here, bring this one across here. And we'll bring this one down a bit. And I think we'll bring this one over here, and this one up here. In fact, I'll leave that one. We'll create one more, right click, subdivide between the 2 points there, bring that up. So we've got a bit of a hill at the end. And maybe we'll bring this one down a bit more and then rotate it. Make sure you set your pivot point back to medium point. And we'll scale that out a bit. All right. So we've got a loop the loop, and we've got a little bit of a hill at the end as well. And that should be fine. Just tidy it up as ever you see fit. So make a few rotations to your handles, etc. All right, so let's play this back and see if there's any problems. So it's looking all right so far. I think at this point we're going to have the hands dangling down, so it's a bit more of an indication that there's gravity in the scene. And then at this point, the character is sort of pointing straight out from the curve, where in reality, walking up a hill, you're going to be leaning forwards. So we'll use another action to fix that part of the animation as well. And if we come to the side, the character's actually got a bit of a tilt. So to fix the tilt, in edit mode, choose the control point which the character is closest to. So I'm going to select both of these actually. And then we've got the mean tilt here. If we drag this, we can get the character to be facing more correctly. And play that back. So let's fix that. Let's just go back a bit. Maybe there as well. On this one. Maybe about here. That seems to be fine. We've got a bit of a tilt there, so choose the one that's nearest, so that'll be this one. Bring it around to about there. Now from this point, I think we should be okay. Yeah, that's looking fine. Next up, we'll come out of edit mode on the curve and we'll select the character. And what we're going to do now is start stacking NLA actions in order to create those effects that we needed for the hands dangling down and also for the leaning forward when going up a hill and leaning backwards as well when we come down the hill. Right, so with the character selected, we'll go into pose mode. And we're going to move the timeline to a point we need to modify. And at this point here, I'm going to create maybe back a few frames when she's still not walking up a hill, we'll create a keyframe on the pelvis bone. This is the one we're going to be changing. So press I. That's created a new action for us. So I'm going to call this one leaning. And then make sure on the right hand side there that the extrapolation is set to hold and blending is set to replace. And now we'll walk forward a bit to this point when she needs to be leaning all the way forward, making sure you've still got auto key enabled. And we'll bring this rotation across and up a bit like this. Make sure her feet stay on the floor. Okay, and play that back. We see we're leaning forward a bit now. We could probably do with going a little bit further. So press the down arrow to go back to the previous keyframe. It's probably a good idea at this point to bring the dope sheet up so we can see where the keyframes are. Press home so we can see them. Zoom out a bit. Right. I think I need to bring the character to bring a bit further forwards. Just got to be careful we don't go too far, otherwise we're going to be, causing problems with this right leg. Maybe about there. Rotate a bit more. Maybe bring it up as much as we can. It is an unrealistically steep hill, but there we go. And then we'll keep moving forward until we get to the top. We don't want the character to be leaning forward again there, so probably at this point we're going to rotate that back round and bring it back a bit and back up. About there. And then we come down the hill. And at this point we need to be leaning back. And then we'll keep walking down. At this point, even further back. Till we get to here, where that's too far now. About there. Until we get to the end, where we can take that character all the way back up. You can see we've got a bit of a tilt going on actually, so we do need to just edit that curve again, just on this end one, on the end control point. Into edit mode, we'll just put a bit of tilt on that one as well. And back into the character, back into pose mode, still got that selected. Let's just try that. Take the timeline back. And there we go. Now there is a problem. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. In fact, there's a problem all the way through. Let's go back to about here. We can see that the character should be bobbing up and down at the waist, but it's completely stationary. And the reason for that is it's the mode we've used for the blending. We've set it to replace, which means it's going to replace the channels below completely. What we need to do is combine it. So let's choose the blending mode, combine. And now if we play this back, you'll see we're getting that bouncing back on the waist. And now we're getting the combination of the two actions, and that's working beautifully. So with that little modification complete, I'm going to save this now by pushing it down into its own strip. Now just pay attention to what happens here. If I push this down now, you'll notice it's gone onto the walk speed strip, which is not what I want because this one's not even turned on. To avoid this happening, I'll just undo this. Make sure you lock the tracks that you don't want to be, to be pushed down onto. So click push down now, and it will create a new track for us. And then we've got all the options over here if we want to tweak them afterwards, and it will still work perfectly as it did before. Alright, so next up, I'd like to get the robot's arms drooping down as she gets to the top of this loop-the-loop. So I want them to slowly start transitioning from the walk cycle arm movement at the beginning of the loop-the-loop to steadily drooping down until they're all the way down here, and then we'll have them slowly transitioning back into the walk cycle arm movement as we get to the end of the loop. So let's find a good place at the beginning of the loop, and just make sure you've still got your key insert set up. So go into the timeline, under keying, make sure you've got location and rotation, and auto key is turned on still, and you've got this set as well to only active key insert. So at this point, maybe about here where the arms are quite straight, I'm going to select all of the arm bones, so the upper arm, the forearm and the hand on both sides. And I'm just going to create a keyframe. So I'll press I, And this is going to capture a keyframe based on the result of the below strips. In this case, just the walk cycle for the selected bones. Make sure you've got extrapolation set to nothing, because what's going to happen is we're going to go around to the other side of the loop now and add a keyframe where we want to transition back into the arm movement for the walk cycle. So if we have this set as hold, you'll see they're just going to be held constantly, whereas we can't really see where the transition point is. So make sure this is set to nothing. Find a good place. So probably about here. And I'm just going to press I again to record this position now. And if we go to the top of the loop, between these 2 points, you'll see we're just going to get these static arms. And at this point, I want them to be fully drooped down. So we need to do it, we need to move them in a physically plausible way so we don't get any strange results. So if you can move your arms now above your head, just pay attention to the way in which you move them. For me, I move them outwards to the side with the palms facing outwards as well. So we'll do the same here. I'm going to rotate the upper arm down. Do the same on this side. And then we'll rotate the hand down. Like that. And maybe give these forearms a little bit of a twist as well. So they're auto keyed in. Let's have a look at this. Slowly coming down. And then back into the walk cycle. Okay, so I don't want this transition to be so obvious. So if we go to this point here, let's just turn the overlays off for a second. Or we'll just turn the, let's just turn the bones off for a moment. If we play this back, it's very sort of immediate. What I want to do is slowly blend into that motion there. So let's turn the bones back on. What we can do, if we choose this action, we can push it down into its own action, into its own strip. It's gone onto the same, track, but in this case, I'm not too bothered because this track is enabled, and both of these can have their own individual options anyway. And what I want to do is use the blending mode of this strip to slowly transition in. And if we zoom in a bit, I'll turn the blending mode up a little bit, and you'll see we get this little white line that shows how many frames it's going to take to blend in fully. And we can do the same on the out to make it blend out as well. And if we just look at this now, you see we get a much more slow transition into this downward droop. And I might actually like it to be a little bit further. So let's drag that a little bit further on both sides. Let's see what this looks like. Go back to here. And now we're getting a really nice transition. But the problem is at the top, at these points here, I don't want it to be completely this action. I still want a little bit of the walk cycle to blend in, just to give these arms a little bit of movement still, because as soon as we get to here, the arms are just, there's no sway anymore. It's just completely using this action here, this strip. And to achieve this, we can't use the blend in and out because there's no sort of max value. So I'm going to set these back to 0, and instead we're going to use the animated influence. So if I turn this on, and we'll go to the first frame, and I'm going to set the influence here to 0. So set this to 0, I'll press I to record it, and then I'm going to go to here. I'm going to probably make it, let's say 0.8, so we still get a little bit of movement. And you see we've got this line now that curves in, but it's not going all the way to the top, so it's still letting a little bit of the walk cycle through. And then we'll go to the end, I'll add another keyframe, just press I because it's already on 0.8, and I'll go to the very end, and I'll set it to 0, and press I again. And now let's have a look. So it's better, but it's not quite enough now. So in the middle, I'm going to change it to maybe 0.93. Let's try that. Yes, I think that's much better. And then lastly, one thing that you might run into, just to cover, is if you come into object mode if you're getting sort of not a very smooth curve, it's going to be evident on the movement of your character. If that is the case if that is the case for you, just choose the curve, go into the curve options, and then at the top you've got the resolution. So if you set the resolution for the render to 0, it will use whatever you've got set in the preview. But by default, I think it's on something quite low, maybe 16. And then you're going to get these really sort of obvious straight lines, which will make the characters walk quite jerky. And if you play this back, you can see it sort of affects the motion of the character. So just turn this up to something like 64, set the render to 0, and that'll match that. And then you'll get a much better result. And finally, I think, on the character, we'll probably get rid of these strips now. I don't need them anymore. So if you want to make sure you don't lose them, again, go across to the blend file in the outliner, or the data API, find actions, and the ones we're going to remove, you can find out what they are. Just click on them, and it'll show us here what we're using. Meta reaction 002. So if we find that over here, we can open it up, and then we can just give it a fake user, so that when I delete this now, by just choosing this and pressing X, we've still got one user, so we're not going to lose it when we close and reopen the file. And we'll do the same for character move. So find that one over here, and this one is called character move. Yeah. So find that one. And we'll give this a fake user as well. It's already got one, in fact. So I'll just close that one, select it and press X to delete it. And that's just tidied it up a little bit over here. So I'll have a quick look at the animation now. We'll turn the armature off in the viewport, the visibility of it. So into this visibility menu, turn the eyeball off. And if you want to save yourself from accidentally clicking things, you can also use the little pointer. If you disable this, it means you can't choose things in the viewport, which can be quite useful. So play this back. There we are. And I think one final cool thing that we can do with this animation is make it so that when the lady robot starts doing the loop, the curve could start bouncing around. And we can do the same for the bridge as well. So let's turn the armature back on in the visibility options, and then we'll press tab, go into object mode, select the curve. And the way we're going to do this to get the curve shape animated is to use something called shape keys. So we'll select the curve, go into the curve properties, and down at the bottom here, we've got shape keys. If we add a new one, this is the default shape, its current shape. And if we add another one, this is now one that we can edit. So I'm going to name this one to loop shake. And with this selected still, go into edit mode. And we'll squash the top down a little bit. And because we've squashed this down, we need to preserve the overall volume, so we're going to scale these ones out. Before we scale, we need to make sure the pivot is in the middle. So press the full stop key, and we'll choose the medium point, so the pivot comes into the middle. And to get it so it's lined up with the view, we'll press comma and set the orientation to view. Now, wherever I'm looking, the X will always be pointing to the right. So I'll do SX, and we'll scale those out a little bit. And straight away, it's going to jump back to the default. And that's because we need to set a value over here. So if I set this to 1, it's going to assume the new shape. And we can animate that to get it to bounce in time with the feed. So we'll bring the character to the point just before she steps on the loop. So about here, this is the first footfall onto the part of the loop where I want it to start sort of bouncing. I want it to be 0 strength. I want it to be its original shape at this point. So on the loop shake, I'm going to add a keyframe by pressing I at 0. And you'll notice as soon as I do that, in the dope sheet, under the Bezier curve, we've now got a new property called key. And if I expand that, we've got the shape key that we've just added the keyframe to. So we go forward a few more frames until the foot all the weight is now on this foot because the other one's in the air, and I want the shape now to be fully squashed. So change this to 1, and it will automatically keyframe it because I've got the auto key enabled on the timeline. And then we'll go to the next one where I want it to be 0, so that's just going to be as the foot lands. So about there, change it to 0, we'll do one more. So all the weight is now on the right foot, and we'll change it to 1. This will give us these keyframes here, and what I'm going to do, just for speed, is go to the end, the point where I want it to be 0 again. So I'd say probably around about here. And we'll change it to 0, and now we've got a marker basically on the dope sheet that tells us where we need to stop. I'm going to copy the keyframes for the last 2 that we did, and I'm going to press, just zoom in a bit, so I need to get the timing right. Shift D, we'll bring that across, and probably actually the better way to do it, across, and we'll zoom in. Now we'll bring the timeline across until the foot lands, so there. And now with these still selected, we'll do Shift D and drag that across so it lines up. And now we'll press Shift R a few times until we get to the end over here. And then for the last ones, we'll just bring these in a little bit, just so it's a similar distance between keyframes. And if we play this back now, as soon as we step on, it's starting to bounce. Now, I want it to be more subtle and build up to a full bounce when she gets to the top. And in order to do that, we can use the graph editor. Hover your mouse over the dope sheet, press Ctrl Tab, and then select this channel for the loop shake. And let's just have a look at what this is actually doing. So when it's set to 0, we've got no shake at all. We're in the original position. When it gets to 1, we've got the shape key called loop shake completely. So we're going to get the full bounce. Now I don't want it to be full strength all the way. I want it to slowly build up until it gets to the middle, and then slowly go back down to a lower value as it gets towards the end. And we need to make sure that the value never goes above 1, otherwise it's just going to get clipped because the shape key can only ever get to a maximum value of 1. It will just show 1 no matter how high you go. So let's make this full screen so we can see it a little bit easier. And the way we're going to do this is to use proportional editing. So turn proportional editing on and select the middle points, either 1 or 2, depending on how many you've got. GY, make sure you press Y, otherwise you'll be able to move all over the place. You just want to lock it in place on the frame, so Y. And then using your mouse wheel, your scroll wheel, just scroll it backwards until the fall off affects all but the last points. You don't want those to move. You don't want these ones to move up and down. So scroll forward again until they're not moving at all. So about here. And take those up. And now again we need to make sure that these all fit below 1. So grab all these, change the pivot point for the graph editor to 2D cursor, just like in the previous video. And that means we're going to be scaling towards this line or this line. So if we press Y when we're scaling, it's going to scale towards the bottom one. SX will scale towards the side one, and just S will scale towards the point where they both meet. So I'm going to do SY until they're down below 1. And if we play this back, we'll see the effect that's had. What's happening here is it's bouncing the same amount every single time. So the distance between the bounce is the same, but the overall shape is slowly drooping down and squashing out as she gets to the top. But what I want to happen is I want the bounce itself to also be bigger. So what we need to do in that case is make the distance between the high point of the bounce and the low point of the bounce greater. So I need to bring these ones down in the middle so there's a bigger gap. Let's do that. We'll do GY. And now we've got a problem because we can't use proportional editing. We can't sort of lock the top keyframes in any way that I'm aware of, at least. So it's impossible to use proportional editing in that way. What we need to do instead is isolate just the bottom ones by selecting them all, and don't select the 2 outer ones. And now with proportional editing turned off, we're going to drag these to the right. So G, X, move those to the right. And now we can edit these without messing these up. So choose this one here. I'm just going to move that one up a little bit actually, about here. And now turn on proportional editing again. We'll do GY, and now we can edit these without affecting the ones over here. So bring those down a bit. Probably about here. Select them all. Turn off proportional editing, GX, and just bring these back now so that they're in the original position. About here. So we've got the same shape, and now we've got a much bigger gap between the peaks and the troughs when it's in the this part of the animation. Now we need to make sure they're all below 1, which they are in this case. But if they weren't all below 1, what we can do is choose them all, and then we can just scale towards the 2D cursor, so make sure that's set as the pivot, and make sure the Y is on 0. So if we move this above 0 and scale, obviously it's going to scale to the wrong place. So just set this to 0, and now we can scale all these on the Y-axis to get them below 1. And by the way, that's an alternative way we could have done what we did before. If we press C and choose these ones, so paint on those, press escape, make sure proportional editing is turned off, G, X, move them across. We can also use that technique instead of moving the middle one down with proportional editing. We can just scale them down to get them wherever you want them, and then move them back. So lots of different ways you can do it. So we'll come back out, go to the beginning, and now we should not only see it gently become more towards the second shape, but as it goes along, the distance of the bounce will also increase in the middle. Let's try that. The bounce is now getting really big, and now it's gradually easing back out again. So moving on to the bridge, we're going to do exactly the same thing. So we'll find the first point where we don't want any shake. So maybe, I'd say probably there. We'll add a new shape key, and we're going to call this one bridge shake. And make sure it's selected, go into edit mode, and just pull the top vertex down a little bit. And then we can set this to 0, so press I to add a keyframe. Then we're going to go to the end point, where we also want it to be no shake, so probably to about here. Set this to 0 again, so another keyframe. And if we look in the graph editor on the left hand side, you'll see we've got a new channel created for the bridge shake. And if you find the loop shake distracting, the keyframes for that one, you can always use the eyeball if you want to hide those. I'm going to do exactly the same as we did before. So high point here, all weights on the right foot. Set this to 1. I'm going to go forwards, 0. We'll repeat that for the next step, and then I'll just duplicate them across till the end of the bridge. Into the graph editor, and we'll do the same as we did over here. Let's have a look at this. So the bridge is looking good, but I've noticed a little problem. We're going to get a little bit of a pop when it gets to about where this green arrow is. Just there. So if we select the armature, we'll notice it's coinciding with the playhead going onto this action we've got here. I'll just play that back. Just a very sudden pop down of the waist. So all I'll do is choose this action. We'll just add a little bit of blending. So we'll give it 5 frames in, should be enough, and 5 frames out. Let's give that a try. There we go, that's smoothed it out.